I can't believe you actually listened to her." Those were the exact words that slipped out of my mouth one late summer night in Dallas, when everything I thought I knew about my marriage cracked like a windshield hit by a stray rock on I-35. But let me roll it back, because betrayal doesn't hit you all at once. It seeps in, drip by drip, until you're drowning and don't even realize the water lines above your nose. My name's Mark, 38 years old, born and raised in Texas, working as a project manager for a mid-sized construction company. If you have ever driven through the suburbs of Dallas and seen those rows of new townhomes popping up like mushrooms after rain, odds are I had a hand in one of them. My wife, Emily, was a nurse, steady, dependable, the kind of woman who knew how to tie off a wound with her bare hands but still cried during Hallmark Christmas movies. We met 12 years ago in the most American way possible, a Friday night diner run after a high school football game. I wasn't playing anymore, but I'd gone back with some buddies to relive the glory days, and there she was, pouring coffee into chipped mugs at Mel's Diner, hair tucked back under a cheap paper visor. She looked exhausted, but when she laughed at something one of her coworkers said, I swear the whole place lit up. Fast forward a few years, we'd built what most folks would call a picture-perfect life. Starter home just off Beltline Road, backyard with a creaky wooden deck where I grilled ribs on Sundays, 2 golden retrievers that acted like they owned the place. We did road trips down to Austin, tailgated at Cowboys games, and had more cookouts than I can count. When Emily passed her RN exam, I bought her a silver bracelet engraved with her initials, and she cried like I'd given her the world. We weren't rich, but we had enough. More importantly, we had each other, or so I thought. Looking back, there were signs, the kind you brush off because you don't want to admit cracks exist in the foundation you poured with your bare hands. It started with Emily's new friend, Claire. Claire was one of those people who always had an opinion, and not the kind that came wrapped in kindness. She was divorced, bitter, living in an apartment complex that smelled faintly of weed and regret. At first, I didn't think much about Emily spending time with her. Everybody needs girlfriends to vent with. But over time, I noticed Emily quoting Claire more than she should. Claire says men never really change. Claire thinks couples need to have their own separate lives. Claire says I should stop worrying about making everyone happy. It was like this woman was moving into our marriage one sentence at a time. I tried to laugh it off, saying stuff like, well, remind Claire she's not exactly winning any Wife of the Year awards. But Emily would bristle, defend her, like I had insulted a sister instead of some half-stranger. Then came the subtle changes, the ones you only notice in hindsight. Emily's phone, once left charging on the kitchen counter, now glued to her like an extra limb. Her late shifts at the hospital seemed to multiply, though her paychecks stayed the same. She used to beg me to come along on grocery runs to Target, and suddenly she insisted she needed some alone time. Even little things like music changed. Our Spotify playlists, once full of country ballads and soft rock, now replaced by moody R&B that sounded more like soundtracks to arguments than love songs. The night that sticks with me most happened on a Saturday in October. We'd been invited to a neighbor's cookout, the kind where everyone shows up with Bud Light, someone inevitably burns the burgers, and the Cowboys game blares from a TV dragged onto the porch. Emily, who always loved these things, begged off at the last minute, saying she was too tired from her shift. I went alone, tried to brush it off, but when I came back around 11, she wasn't home. Her car wasn't in the driveway. When she finally walked in near midnight, hair messy and smelling faintly of a perfume I didn't recognize, she claimed she'd grabbed coffee with Claire. Now, I didn't say anything then. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe the woman who once stayed up all night with me, talking about our future, would never lie about something so simple. But the seed was planted. From that night on, every late shift, every secretive smile at her phone, every cold shoulder in bed felt heavier, like a brick piling onto my chest. The hardest part was the way she looked at me, or rather, the way she stopped looking at me. Emily used to meet my eyes across the kitchen table and grin like we shared some private joke no one else in the world could get. That look vanished, replaced by distracted nods, eyes flicking back down to her phone. She'd laugh at texts, never explain why. And when I asked if something was wrong, she'd snap, "Not everything's about you, Mark." For weeks, I told myself I was imagining things. Stress from work, the economy, her exhausting shifts. I clung to any excuse that would let me keep believing our marriage was untouched by the rot I saw in other people's stories. The kind you read on Reddit at 2 in the morning, scrolling through revenge stories and infidelity confessions, telling yourself, that'll never be me. But here's the truth. It was me. I just hadn't gathered the courage to admit it yet. And deep down, I knew Claire's voice was somewhere in the middle of it all, whispering poison into Emily's ear until she couldn't tell which thoughts were hers and which belonged to her so-called friend. The night the facade truly cracked came on a Thursday. Emily said she was heading to an overnight shift, kissed me on the cheek like always, and left. Hours later, I woke up to grab a glass of water and noticed her scrubs folded neatly on the chair in our bedroom. I stood there in the dark, staring at them, my stomach nodding. If she was at work, why were her scrubs still here? I told myself maybe she had extras in her locker, maybe she changed there, but the doubt was louder than the logic. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay in bed, watching the ceiling fan spin shadows across the room, wondering when my life had turned into something out of those betrayal stories I used to pity strangers for posting. By the time dawn broke, one truth had rooted itself so deep in my gut I couldn't shake it. Emily wasn't just tired, or distant, or stressed. Something darker was happening, something Claire had lit the match for. And the worst part? I didn't yet know how far the fire had spread. That morning after I found Emily's scrubs folded neatly on the chair, I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the steam rising. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. I tried to convince myself that she had another set of scrubs, maybe even more than one, and that I was being paranoid. But paranoia doesn't feel like a storm blowing in. It feels like a steady drip in your mind, and once you notice it, you can't unhear it. When Emily finally came home around 8 a.m., her hair was tousled, but not in that just finished a 12-hour shift way. She smelled faintly of cologne, not antiseptic, and her hands didn't have the faint indentations from gloves that usually lingered after hospital work. She kissed me on the cheek, mumbled something about being exhausted, and went straight to the shower. I watched her go, a knot in my chest pulling tighter, and told myself that if there was an answer, I had to start looking for it. The first clue didn't take long. Later that day, I decided to take her car in for an oil change since she'd been too busy to do it. While cleaning out the front seat, I found a Starbucks receipt wedged between the seat and console. Nothing unusual about that, except the timestamp read 11:42 p.m., the night she told me she was working an overnight shift. And the location? A Starbucks near Love Field Airport, miles away from her hospital. My hands went cold as I held that little slip of paper, the ink smudged but legible enough to feel like a dagger in my gut. I didn't confront her, not yet. If there's one thing I've learned from reading those endless Reddit stories about betrayal, it's that confronting too early only gives them time to cover their tracks. No, I needed more than a flimsy receipt. I needed hard evidence. So, I started paying attention. Every time she said she was heading to work, I noted the exact time she left. I wrote it down in a notebook I kept hidden under the seat of my truck. I checked her mileage on the car before and after her supposed shifts. I even synced our iPad to her iMessage account, pretending I needed it for work emails. That's when the puzzle started to take shape. One Tuesday night, while she was working, I opened the iPad and saw a thread of texts she hadn't deleted yet. They weren't explicit, but the tone made my stomach churn. The sender's name was saved as Claire, but the words didn't sound like something her friend would write. Last night was amazing. Can't stop thinking about you. Same spot Thursday? Emily had responded with a string of heart emojis. I stared at that screen, my pulse pounding so loud I thought I'd wake the dogs. Was it possible Claire was covering for someone else? Or had Emily saved another man's number under her friend's name, thinking she'd outsmart me? Either way, it wasn't just innocent coffee dates. The next prop fell into my lap almost by accident. Emily asked me to grab her wallet from her purse one afternoon. As I pulled it out, I noticed a hotel keycard tucked into one of the side pockets. It was from the Hilton Garden Inn off Stemmons Freeway, a place I'd driven past 100 times on my way to work. My stomach dropped. Nurses working double shifts don't need hotel key cards. Cheating wives do. I kept it, slipping it into my back pocket before she noticed. That night, I sat in my truck outside that very Hilton, watching couples come and go. I didn't see Emily, but the act of sitting there, staring at the glowing sign, made everything more real. She had a life I wasn't part of, and Claire, either as accomplice or cover, was tangled up in it. By then, I was running on equal parts rage and ice-cold calculation. I went online and ordered a cheap GPS tracker, the kind you can hide in a glove box. When it arrived 2 days later, I slipped it into her car when she was inside Target. That same night, while she told me she was heading for another night shift, I pulled up the tracker on my phone and watched her little dot drift not toward the hospital, but toward a residential neighborhood in Richardson. I drove out there, parking a few streets over, and sure enough, I spotted her car in the driveway of a tidy brick ranch-style house. I wanted to storm in, knock on the door, and drag the truth out right then and there, but something in me held back. If I barged in without undeniable evidence, she'd gaslight me, twist the narrative, maybe even claim I was controlling. I needed proof so solid it would crush every lie she tried to spin. That's when I decided to escalate. I installed a discreet camera in our living room, hidden inside a photo frame. If she was bringing anyone into our home, I'd know. I also started quietly pulling bank statements from our joint account. That's where I found a series of charges that made my blood boil. Dinners at steakhouses in Addison, Uber rides late at night, and most damning, a jewelry store purchase she never showed me. Piece by piece, the facade was crumbling, but the final straw came 2 weeks later. I got home earlier than usual from a work site because of a rain delay. The house was supposed to be empty. Emily had said she was on a shift. But when I pulled into the driveway, her car was already there. My heart hammered as I stepped quietly inside. I didn't hear voices, but I did hear the faint sound of her shower running upstairs. On the kitchen counter, her phone buzzed with a notification. I shouldn't have looked, but at that point, trust was already dead. I tapped the screen and saw the text. "Can't wait to see you tonight. Wish we could stay longer." The contact name? Claire again. But my gut told me otherwise. Claire's advice had been more than just friendly meddling. It had been the cover story for something darker, something intimate. I backed out of the house before she could notice me, sitting in my truck with the rain hammering the windshield. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white. The Starbucks receipt, the hotel key card, the iMessages, the GPS tracker, the charges, they weren't just coincidences. They were a trail of breadcrumbs leading to one brutal conclusion. Emily had betrayed me, and she'd used her friend's advice as the excuse to justify every step of it. And as I sat there in the rain, one thought took root that I couldn't shake. She had no idea what move I was about to make next. The rain hadn't stopped that night, and neither had my thoughts. By the time I pulled into the office parking lot the next morning, I had a plan forming in my head. It wasn't enough to know the truth. I wanted her to face it in a way she couldn't deny, couldn't twist, couldn't pin back on me. If Emily had chosen betrayal, then I was going to choose exposure. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. A week later, Emily suggested we go out for dinner to reconnect. That word almost made me laugh, like a Band-Aid steak dinner could fix the crater she'd blown into our marriage. Still, I agreed. Part of me wanted to see her try to play normal while I carried the weight of everything I knew. But mostly, I saw it as the stage I needed. I picked a nice spot, a dimly lit steakhouse in Addison. The kind of place where the servers wear pressed shirts and whisper when they pour your wine. She dressed up in a black dress I hadn't seen in years, and for a brief moment, I almost let myself believe she was still my Emily. But when she smiled at me across the table, I saw the lie sitting in her eyes like a shadow. We made small talk while the waiter brought bread and iced teas. She asked about my projects. I asked about the hospital, both of us dancing around the silence we knew was waiting. Finally, when the steaks arrived, I set my fork down and slid a small envelope across the table. "What's this?" she asked, her hand hovering over it. "Why don't you open it and find out?" I said, my voice steady, almost cold. She pulled the photos out first, grainy shots from the GPS tracker app, showing her car parked in the Richardson driveway. Next came the Starbucks receipt, then the hotel key card. Her face drained of color with each piece, her lips parting like she wanted to speak, but couldn't find words. "Mark, Don't. Just don't," I cut her off. "I've read the messages, Emily. I know Claire isn't Claire. You thought you could hide behind her name, but you slipped. You've been lying to me for months." Her eyes darted around the restaurant, as if checking to see if anyone was listening. A couple at the next table glanced our way, then quickly looked back at their own food. The silence stretched until finally she said, "It's not what you think." I laughed. It was sharp, bitter, the kind of laugh that comes out when you've run out of tears. "It's exactly what I think. You weren't at the hospital, you weren't with Claire, you were with him." "Mark, please keep your voice down," she hissed, panic creeping into her tone. But I didn't lower my voice. If anything, I leaned in closer. "Why? Embarrassed? Afraid the truth might crawl out of your perfect little shell?" She reached for my hand across the table, but I pulled it back. "You don't understand," she whispered. "Claire, she told me I deserved more, that I'd been settling, that maybe I'd lost myself in being a wife and a nurse. I wasn't looking for this, it just—" "Don't you dare blame Claire for this," I snapped. "She didn't force you to sneak into hotel rooms. She didn't type those texts. She didn't spend our money on someone else. That was all you." The waiter approached just then, tray in hand, but froze when he caught the tension between us. Is everything all right here?" he asked nervously. "Everything's fine," Emily said quickly, forcing a smile, but her voice cracked on the last word, betraying her. "No, actually," I said, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "Everything's not fine. My wife here has been cheating on me, and tonight's her little performance pretending nothing's wrong." The words landed like a hammer. Conversations around us stuttered to a halt, forks hovering mid-air, eyes flicking toward our table. Emily's face went red, then pale, then red again. "Mark, please," she whispered. But I wasn't finished. I pulled my phone out, thumbed through the gallery, and turned the screen toward her. "Recognize this? That's your car in front of his house. That's your message telling him last night was amazing. You want to keep going, or should I start passing the phone around so everyone can see what a liar looks like?" Gasps rippled from the table behind us. Someone muttered, "Damn," under their breath. Emily pushed back from the table, her chair scraping against the floor. "You're humiliating me." I stood too, my voice steady, colder than I'd ever heard myself. "No, Emily, you humiliated yourself. I'm just shining a light on it." For a moment, the restaurant seemed to freeze. Waiters holding trays, diners staring, Emily standing there with tears streaking her makeup. And then she bolted, weaving through the tables, nearly knocking into a server as she fled out the front door. I didn't chase her. I just stood there, breathing hard, my phone still in my hand. A few people looked at me with pity, others with curiosity. One older man raised his glass in a quiet salute, like he'd been through something similar and knew exactly what I was feeling. I paid the bill, left the envelope of evidence on the table, and walked out into the night. The cool air hit my face like a wave, and for the first time in months, I felt something close to control. Emily thought she was playing me, hiding behind her friend's advice and clever excuses. But now she knew, so did half the restaurant, that the game was over. When I got home, the house was dark, her car gone. On the kitchen counter sat her phone, buzzing with a new message. The preview lit up the screen. "Where are you? Did he find out?" I didn't unlock it. I didn't need to. I just stared at those words until the buzzing stopped, my hands steady, my mind clear. Because now, the question wasn't whether Emily had betrayed me. I had all the proof in the world. The real question was what move I was going to make next. And I already knew the answer. The days that followed Emily's public exposure felt surreal, like I was living inside a newsreel only I could see. The neighborhood whispered. Friends called, some cautiously, others with barely concealed curiosity. My phone rang incessantly, but I answered sparingly, mostly for legal matters. Emily didn't return to the house. She had moved into a short-term rental somewhere closer to the city. I hadn't blocked her number, but I didn't respond either. That was the first lesson. Silence can be louder than any confrontation. I met with my lawyer a few days after the dinner incident. We went over the evidence, the photos, GPS logs, receipts, messages, everything meticulously cataloged. She tried to argue about privacy, insinuate that some of the texts were misleading, but my lawyer laughed politely and said, "Mr. Sanders has a very thorough record, and nothing here is ambiguous." In less than an hour, we had filed for divorce papers with full custody of the kids, an equitable division of assets, and she was informed that any attempt at interference would be met with legal consequences. That day, walking out of the office, I felt the first pang of relief in months. The house was quiet when I returned, and I decided to reclaim it slowly, intentionally. I started small, moved a few pieces of furniture, rearranged family photos, washed dishes she hadn't touched in weeks. It was therapeutic in a way I hadn't anticipated, turning domestic routines into acts of quiet reclamation. I cooked breakfast for the kids, pancakes with chocolate chips, their sticky little fingers smearing syrup across the counter. They laughed in ways that made the ache in my chest dull, even if only for a few moments. I also returned to old habits I'd neglected. A morning jog around White Rock Lake, waving to familiar neighbors, grabbing coffee at the diner on Mockingbird Lane. Life felt like it had paused for months while Emily played her game, and now I was reclaiming the frames of ordinary days. The mundane rituals became anchors, A Bud Light on the porch in the evening, a football game on ESPN in the background, kids' crayons marking the paper in messy, chaotic art. These small things reminded me that the world still turned, and I was still part of it. At the same time, the social ripple from the restaurant confrontation had spread further than I expected. Her friends, the ones who'd encouraged her, began to distance themselves. Whispers in hospital corridors turned to cautious avoidance. Emily had made a public mess of her choices, and the fallout extended beyond me. It wasn't a vindictive satisfaction, it was simply the natural consequence of her actions. People began treating her the way one treats someone who sets fire to their own house. You step back and watch it burn, but you don't get too close. The kids sensed the tension easing. They still asked questions, some too small, some too large, but I answered honestly in age-appropriate ways. Sometimes adults make mistakes, I told my eldest one evening while tucking him in, but what matters is that we love each other and take care of our family. That's how we fix things that are broken. The youngest curled up with her stuffed animal, not understanding every word, but feeling the safety of our renewed routine. I also took a moment for myself, which had been almost impossible during the months of suspicion and confrontation. I sat on the porch one evening with a notebook and pen, reflecting. The temptation for revenge had been real. Sometimes it still whispered, but I realized the real victory wasn't in retaliation. It was in peace, in reclaiming life on my terms. My anger, while justified, didn't need to dictate the next steps. Instead, I focused on rebuilding, on nurturing the life I wanted to lead for my kids and myself. A week after the divorce proceedings were officially filed, I found an envelope in the mailbox. It was from Emily. Inside, only a single sentence typed neatly on a piece of stationery. "I'm sorry, and I understand why you hate me." There was no plea, no attempt to manipulate, just acknowledgement. I crumpled it in my hand, feeling neither triumph nor sadness. It was simply closure. On a bright Sunday morning, I made pancakes, poured orange juice, and called the kids to the table. Outside, the sun reflected off the clean siding of the house. Birds chirped, and somewhere down the street, a neighbor's dog barked. I took a sip of my coffee, glancing at the stack of papers from the divorce proceedings resting on the counter. No one was yelling, no one was lying, no one was hiding. For the first time in a long time, the house felt like a home again. I thought about Emily once more that evening while settling the kids for bed. She had been part of my life for years, and yet, her betrayal had taught me more about resilience than any other hardship I had endured. Sometimes the people you trust the most are the ones who hurt you, but it's how you respond that defines your future. I reminded myself that revenge could be messy, destructive, and temporary, but reclaiming your life, your peace, and your family, that's permanent. As I stepped onto the porch with a cold Bud Light in hand, the sky painted with the dying colors of sunset, I laughed quietly to myself. The wind rustled the leaves, the kids' laughter echoed faintly from inside, and the world felt remarkably normal. Sometimes, life delivers poetic justice without any need for theatrics. I raised my bottle to the horizon, a toast to survival, to clarity, and to a future rebuilt on honesty and love. "Sometimes the trash takes itself out," I muttered, smiling at the irony of the phrase. It was simple, American, utterly mundane, and yet it summed up everything perfectly. And with that, I finally exhaled, letting the tension of months slip away, leaving only the steady, comforting rhythm of life returning to its rightful place.